In this project, we're going to be creating an original magazine concept and designing a cover for that magazine. You can work in any topic that you want, but I recommend doing something that you're passionate about or knowledgeable about. And it's important to note that we're creating original magazines, so don't take a magazine that already exists and redesign it. We want to create something from scratch. So the first thing we have to do is pick the topic and select a name for the magazine, and then design what's called the masthead. And the masthead is the sort of logo for that magazine. Always goes in the top third of the magazine. That's important because these magazines sit in magazine racks, and if the masthead isn't in that top third, the masthead will be covered up by the next magazine in that rack. So that's an important feature of the masthead. Mastheads are simple, they're always typographic based, and we're not going to spend too much time creating a really custom masthead. It's more going to be about selecting the right font and the right position and color for that masthead. There are some different strategies for applying the masthead to the magazine cover. Like I said, the masthead always goes in that top third section, and I want you to stick to that for this assignment. But there are some different ways that you can apply it. For instance, with GQ on the left, you can see that it is actually going behind the image. Always lives in that top left corner. It's always that same size. But a lot of times, they'll have this overlap, and so you actually can't even read the Q. But since GQ's masthead is so iconic, we know that it's GQ even without being able to read both letters. Monocle, on the other hand, takes a more structured approach, where they always have this kind of top area zoned off, and in that area they always have the masthead along with some relevant headlines, and then the image area is always in the bottom 2/3. This is a magazine called Printed Pages, and it's a really great magazine that covers all kinds of creative topics. But I really wanted to show it because it's a great example of both what I want you to do for this assignment, but also what I don't want you to do. So on the left here, we have this cover that's featuring Kanye West, and the image of him has been cut out, and all of his features have been turned into this sort of like weird collage. Okay, whereas on the right, we're basically just using a photograph on its own, along with a masthead. And both of these covers are great covers, but I want you to stick to things that are more modified, kind of like what's going on the left, rather than just a photograph on its own, like what we have on the right. The reason for that is since we're graphic designers, we really want to show off our graphic design abilities in this particular assignment. So, although I like the cover on the right, it's a really interesting photograph, it's really more the photographer that did all of the creative work rather than the graphic designer. So it is important that you do some sort of modification to your photograph. It could be as simple as cutting things out and changing the background, but I don't want to just see a photo all on its own. Even if it's a successful cover, it's not going to be a good way to show off your skills as a designer. Here's a magazine called The Pitchfork Review, which is about music. It's a really beautiful magazine. It's a shame that their print edition is no longer being created, so they only have their online version. But here's two great covers from them. I like how they've kept it really simple with this one on the left. It's a saxophone, they've changed the background, and there's some cool interaction here where there's a headline that's talking about the style of the issue or the topic for the issue, and that's sort of integrating into the photograph, which is really clever. Then over on the right, we have a more complex solution, but again, we've used a photograph, and the photograph is interacting with this really colorful illustration. The illustration is even sort of coming into the masthead as well, which is really fun and creative. This is one thing to consider when you're creating your magazine is what type of feel do you want your magazine to have? Is it going to be really youthful and vibrant? Is it going to be really news-like and just sort of structured? There's a lot of different looks for the way your magazine can express itself, and it's important to create a look that is both consistent with your topic and works well with the target audience that you're going after with your magazine. Wired is another great magazine example. They have a lot of range with their covers and their design in general. So you can see over on the left, they've created this sort of collage with these different little pieces of data, so representing this idea of searching. Then on the right, we have a more simple solution using imagery from Pixar and then weaving the typography in with that imagery. So I love how the type comes behind the helmet. That interaction is really nice. Then of course this hat comes in front of the masthead as well, and that's a really normal thing to see in covers. Is a person or some sort of object coming in front of the masthead to create a little bit of interaction. It's always a really good look. Here's a magazine called Port that I really like for its clean look. It's another magazine that kind of covers a catch-all of creative concepts and fashion. And I love their masthead because of these little cuts that just make it a little bit different from standard typography, something you might consider when you create your masthead. It's not totally required for this assignment, but little tiny modifications can sometimes help to make it just a little bit more special than standard typography. And then in the cover designs themselves, you can see that we've brought the subject in front of the masthead, again creating a little bit of interaction between the masthead and the image. And then over on the left, we have this sort of dark area of the photograph where the subject's face is in shadow, and we've used that as an opportunity to place all of our headlines. I love the typography that they're using over here. All these lines are creating a lot of structure, but it feels overall very clean. So really successful covers. Oxford American is a literary magazine that is focused on the South. And again, this is just a really gorgeous cover. We've taken a pretty basic photograph here, but we've woven typography around that photograph. So in some areas, the typography is coming in front. In some situations, the typography is coming behind. That's creating a lot of engagement and interaction in the image zone. This is also a structured cover. So just like Monocle, we have a little zone at the top, and that is where the masthead goes. Okay, so in this case, the masthead's not going right over the image. We've actually created a little bit of margin specifically for that masthead. I love the decision of, putting this typography in front and actually breaking that, masthead area to, again, just create a little bit more engagement and have it be a bit more dynamic than if it was just being cut off at the top. Bloomberg Businessweek is a really smart magazine. Their covers are always very conceptual. Here's a cover that they did during the housing crisis. And, it's a combination of the house, the symbol of the American dream, and then that sort of dream going through a paper shredder. And over on the right, talking about Sony featuring one of its most signature products ever, the Walkman, and having the tape from the Walkman sort of strangling and binding the actual Walkman itself. So a really smart way to talk about Sony and address some of the issues with that company. And Bloomberg has a bunch of covers just like this. So I definitely recommend that you look into all the cool covers they've done over the years. And lastly, we have Delayed Gratification, which is a news magazine, but it's a little bit different because they don't report on news right away. They wait a little bit, and that allows them to have a broader perspective on the way things unfold. So over on the left, we have this sort of collage that's being created with a bunch of elements. This is something you might want to do. Maybe you want to do something like we did for the photographic collage exercise, where you cut things out really rough and you sort of mash them together in some sort of interesting way. And then on the right, we have this photograph where there's a bunch of people. They're being aligned with this sort of measuring thing. So there's something really conceptual and simple happening in this photograph. That's working really well too. I wanted to show you this website called Cover Junkie because this is a great place to get a ton of inspiration for your magazine cover, both for the masthead, but more importantly for the image and how the image is relating to the masthead and the other typography. So definitely take a look through here. There is a ton of examples of really contemporary and well-designed magazines. And you can click on any of these to get a bigger image. And yeah, just look at all the really cool things that can be done with this image space. Some of them are a little bit more simple, but there's also a lot of examples of the type of things I want in this assignment. And remember, it's some sort of photographic modification rather than just an image on its own. So this is a great example. We have this cow that is being sort of skewered with a fork. And even though this is not in English, I can tell that we're talking about, something related to food and how we consume food. Okay, so this is a great example, and I hope you find some really nice inspiration from this website.